What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. Throughout the years, League of Legends has had a ton of just insanely powerful abilities and just so many champions that have just truly dominated the game and mechanics that you never would even believe existed once. And if you put them in the game today, they would just be outrageous. So join us today in counting down the top 10 most powerful abilities to ever exist in League of Legends history. And if you guys enjoyed the video, definitely hit that like button and let's begin. So kicking off the list at number 10 is actually going to be Kayle's ultimate back in the beta phase. Now Kayle has been notoriously strong throughout the years and she's one of the only real hybrid AP/AD champions in the game, but what she's really known for is her ability to prevent all damage on herself or another allied champion. Targeted invulnerability is a crazy strong mechanic to have, and most of her kit is a lot less complicated and weaker as a result because man, that ult is just so damn good. You can use it to tower dive, bait people under your own tower, get clutch saves, or just 1v3 opponents if you're fed really. It's super versatile and fits great with her theme. And so you might actually be wondering what's so special about the beta version of Kayle Ultimate, and it was actually very similar to the current version of Kayle's Ultimate, but with one major difference. The duration was 6 seconds. So intervention currently scales from 2 to 3 seconds on the game today as you level it up, but back in beta it would stick on you or an ally for a full 6 seconds, which honestly just meant so much damage was prevented, and there was so many more overpowered situations where your team would just get wrecked by an unkillable champion, and there's so much more you can do with it. I mean, it's literally twice as good, twice the duration, and that brings Kayle at our number 10 on the list. So number 9 is actually going to take after number 10 slightly, just a little bit of a step up on the broken scale, which is beta Tryndamere's ultimate Undying Rage, which kinda like Kayle's ultimate used to have a way longer duration of, at the time, 9 seconds. Now that might not sound like necessarily that long of a time, but think about it this way. I mean, imagine getting hit with a Morgana binding without any tenacity, and how that 3 seconds feels like such an absolute eternity. Now imagine it's 3 times longer, only instead of being stuck in one place, it's being unable to fight back as just this crazy barbarian dude smacks about you with his massive sword. Since his ultimate also increases his damage output as well, it also meant he was even stronger for the duration, so he could pretty much do whatever he wanted, whether it's taking down all your towers or just 1v5ing your team, whatever you really felt like doing. Fortunately, back in beta, there were a ton of overpowered crowd control abilities to try and stop him for some of the time that he was unkillable, but 9 seconds is way too much for any crowd control, and he was pretty much always guaranteed to get at least a kill or 2. Next up at number 8, we have Ryze with, of course, you guessed it, his beta ultimate. Beta abilities are definitely going to be a big theme throughout the video, and a big theme with Ryze over the years has been his spell flux, and he's had quite a few different versions of it. Nowadays it lets him mark targets for bonus effects. Before that rework, it used to be on his E and it would let him bounce between units a few times. Back in beta though, it was actually on his ultimate, spell flux, and it could bounce between Ryze and another unit a bunch of times while actually dealing just a ton of damage on each bounce, which meant that if you used it against an isolated target, it would only bounce to them and back to you and back to them again, doing insane damage, and could essentially just insta-kill anyone with its base damage. It was a little bit less effective if you used it versus a group of enemies, since it wouldn't just insta-kill one guy, but there wasn't really that much counterplay, and it still just did such a ridiculous amount of base scaling and base damages, and if you ever ended up fighting a Ryze, well, he would just root you and blow you up with his ultimate in just a second. So as we progress through this list, it turns out that the most powerful abilities in League of Legends history really just is the most powerful beta abilities, to be honest. But you kind of had to guess that coming into it, since beta was definitely a super insane time when all of the abilities in general were just super overtuned in terms of League of Legends. And at number 7, we're taking a look at Zilean, whose original ultimate back in the beta phase made Tryndamere's 9-second unkillable mode look, well, not that great. One of the fun parts about playing against Zilean is that you can kind of bait his ultimate out, or maybe try to kill someone off before he manages to land the ultimate on them nowadays, since he only really has a small window of time to actually be able to cast his ultimate before an ally dies, and if he casts it too early these days, people just won't kill the champion he uses it on until it expires a few seconds later. Well, In the beta, Zilean had a little bit of a way around that problem because his Chrono Shift, his ultimate, it had the same effect, but it had a 90-second duration, which is a minute and a half of there's literally no point in killing this guy because he's just going to pop back up, which is honestly just so insane in terms of pressure because it means no matter what you do, that fight is a 5v6, with the 6th champion being the revived version of whoever is just the strongest on the enemy team, which is also just pretty nuts because, I mean, with cooldown reduction, it pretty much means you almost permanently have a Chrono Shift on an ally, since it won't be that long after the ability expires that you could just cast it again, and the ability itself was just mind-boggling. And at number 6 is Master Yi with his beta. Actually, just kidding. Finally, we have an ability that's from the alpha. So back in the alpha phase, Master Yi's Q wasn't his Alpha Strike. Alpha Strike was actually his ultimate, and Highlander was a normal ability instead on his basic kit. So aside from doing ridiculous damage and insane base scaling with a 3.0 AD ratio, the ultimate version of Alpha Strike would bounce to 10 targets rather than 4, meaning you could use it in a minion wave and you would still hit every enemy champion no problem. It was essentially just the ultimate wave clear and team wipe, and since it dealt 300% of Master Yi's attack damage to everything it hit, plus as usual he couldn't be targeted during it, well, you would pretty much just melt teams sometimes. And if you were fed, you can honestly just get a pentakill with the single ability, which is pretty awesome to think about for a wombo combo. I mean, imagine landing a Malphite ultimate and then following up with a Master Yi super Q that did just a crap ton of damage and never accidentally bounced to a minion and lost a chance to hit an enemy champion in the process. And well, you're at Alpha Master Yi. Breaking into the top 5, we have Kassadin, who's a champion that was released in the closed beta of League of Legends. Now, his ultimate on release was just insanely powerful. It was very similar to the Rift Walk that we've kind of been familiar to for a very long time actually, but honestly just upgraded in every possible way, shape, or form. You know, the mana cost was a lot lower, meaning that he could stack it up without running out of mana. The range was also 900 units, which made it an absolutely massive jump. And it also only had a 3-second cooldown at the time, so we could jump super quickly, although maybe not quite as quick as he can after the most recent changes to it, but the range is triple what it is now pretty much. And on top of the huge cheap stacks, it dealt way more damage, twice as much damage as it does these days. Essentially, Kassadin was just this super inescapable monster that stacked up his Rift Walk without really caring about the mana cost, and he'd just go around deleting people with the insane amount of damage and burst that he would pull out in the AoE whenever he decided to jump to, and overall, in general, it made Beta Kassadin a monster. So at number 4, we have an ability on the list that was around both in beta, but actually in Season 1 as well, and that is Evelynn, with her old Shadow Walk and her W, actually. It's not an ultimate, a basic ability, and it used to have an effect where her first hit on an enemy after breaking stealth would stun the target for up to 2 seconds. And considering this came out of nowhere because she had a lot of other damage on her kit, it actually made her scarily powerful because not only did she have a very long-lasting stun and a lot of damage popping out of stealth, it gave her permanent stealth pretty much. The stealth lasted for about 60 seconds, perhaps longer, and she really just became a well-known pub stomper because out of nowhere you could just get stunned and destroyed. And it was later changed to be a slow instead of a stun for balance purposes, which totally killed the ability, but for an effect that was reusable every time you came out of stealth, that also gave you pretty much permanent lasting stealth. It was honestly one of the most powerful abilities ever because you could just walk into a lane completely invisible and just ruin someone's day. Not to mention that the stealth didn't have any indicators on it whatsoever. You would literally just smack their face and they would die, and it was insane. Next up at number 3, we're giving it to Sion in his alpha form, actually, potentially an ability that some of you guys didn't know about, with one of the more pretty ridiculous abilities in the history of the game. You know, pre-rework Sion back in the day could be played one of 2 ways, you know. The way he was meant to be played as a tanky fighter that lifestealed a ton, or he could also be played as this crazy AP champion that would stun you, pop his W, Cryptic Gaze every few seconds, while also dealing a crap ton of damage with Lichbane triggers and stuff like that. But his Q wasn't a skill shot either, it was a targeted stun, but we're not taking a look at his stun actually, we're looking at his W. And in the alpha phase, Cryptic Gaze was just so crazy because it actually had a 2.0 AP ratio on the ability. So at 500 AP, you'd get 1000 bonus magic damage on the W, and combined with its relatively low cooldown and the stun attached to it, and you essentially just could never go near Sion, otherwise you'd get stunned, destroyed, and just wrecked in no time at all. And Riot completely obliterated all trace of Cryptic Gaze when they reworked Sion, because he was never really intended to be played that way, and it honestly also had kind of no counterplay, but it was a lot of fun to use back in the day. Now our number 2 spot is going to Beta Twisted Fate with his original Pick a Card, and we've talked about this ability quite a few times before, and for good reason, because it was honestly just so disgustingly powerful. Pick a Card used to have much different effects back in beta to what it has now. You know, Red Card was actually kind of similar, pretty much did the same thing with a little bit less damage, but Blue Card let Twisted Fate re-pick another card after throwing it, so you could chain blue cards together to get easy CS or just a bunch of extra sustained damage on a single target. But the real craziness was his gold card, which not only stunned like it does today, but it stunned a group of enemies in an area of effect, targeted, and dealt way more damage than the red card, was on a crazy low cooldown, and just did so much damage, and the stun lasted for quite a long time as well. You wouldn't ever really use red card because it was kind of just better to use gold card every time, but he could honestly just use it to chain crowd control an entire team all by himself, and the ability had like a 4-second cooldown. It was just so insane, you know, one of the most broken abilities in the history of the entire game, and it's one of the main powerhouses that made Beta Twisted Fate such a monster. But there was one exception. And that exception was, of course, Twisted Fate's other insanely overpowered ability, which was his Beta E. So yep, both the top 2 most powerful abilities in League of Legends history ever belong to Twisted Fate at the exact same time, which really puts into perspective how ridiculous Beta Twisted Fate was. You know, you might think that you could maybe escape Twisted Fate's AoE stuns by staying out of his range or avoiding him on the map, but his E had other ideas, and in beta his E was called Gate, and it was his teleport that is now on his ultimate. And it wasn't just, it was actually much stronger. It was a global teleport, and it was on a basic ability, and it doesn't take much explaining to say why that's overpowered, because it also had a 30-second cooldown, so we could pop up somewhere new to kill people just about every half a minute. And did I mention that it was global? It also did have a little bit of a channel time, at least until he used his ultimate, Destiny, which revealed everyone on the map, gave crit chance to his team, and made his teleport cast instantly. Actually, there was absolutely nowhere to run and hide from Twisted Fate. He would catch up to you and kill you without breaking a sweat, and Twisted Fate definitely earns the top of any list for something that's the most powerful ever in League of Legends, and rightfully so. And that's just about going to wrap up our list for the top 10 most powerful abilities ever. You know, it's crazy to think that the top 2 both belong to the same champion at the same point in the game, actually. And a lot of these champions, pretty much all of them, have had their kits drastically changed since the versions of these abilities that existed in the past. And we can only be happy that Riot came to their senses and nerfed them into oblivion. Either way though, looks like that's going to be it for me. If you guys enjoyed the video, drop a like, subscribe if you want. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.